Hello and welcome back to Like Maria. Today another language video. This time I'm going to talk about critics of prescriptivism. And I'm going to talk about three people: Robert Lane Greene, Leslie Milroy and Jean Aitchison. So after today you'll know lots about these three linguists and their views on people that criticise development of language. So first off, I'm going to talk about Greene. Greene criticises people who he calls are sticklers, grouches, scolds and vigilantes. He says that these people police the language and spend their time nitpicking tiny little details and criticising people for getting things wrong or saying things differently. He says one thing is clear: language is always changing. He says that language pundits cherish the traditional aspects of language that they learnt in their education. They think that language must now be bad because the language they learnt at school was good. And they spend their time writing letters to various newspapers and complaining and grouching about it. One of these people might well be Prince Charles. He talks about how the youth of today speak English and write English bloody badly. And so Greene is really criticising these people who pick up details. And the sorts of details I'm talking about are misuse of apostrophes, using double negatives where one negative would do, using terms in your speech like in it and like. And Greene says all of these things are part of change and part of a natural development, and we shouldn't criticise people who use these. So he criticises the critics, he criticises the sticklers. Next up, very famous linguist Leslie Milroy. You might remember her from the work she did with her partner in Belfast about accents. If not, do go away and look that up. Milroy talks about a narrative of complaint. She criticises what she calls the complainers. She says people complain because they don't like the variety of English used. They call things mistakes that aren't actually mistakes. And she says people have always complained. For years and years, people have been talking about how language use has deteriorated. But actually we know that people speak a lot more today. They speak on the phone, on the television, on the radio. They write a lot more. People are blogging and texting and emailing much more. We have a much more literate population than we did 100 years ago. So it can't be the case that things have deteriorated. If we look back in history, we can actually see that people like Jonathan Swift and Cheek and Orwell were always complaining about English. And so this complaint narrative, Leslie Milroy says, is completely uncalled for. She also says people complain about things that aren't mistakes. She talks about, for instance, the way people say I'm not. In some parts of the country, they might say I ain't. In other parts, they might say I amn't. It all means the same thing. We understand it. There are regional varieties and differences in the way we use English. And these aren't mistakes. These should be just described in a descriptive attitude. There are also other grammatical errors that Milroy says aren't errors. Things like she were happy, we was running. Perhaps a Yorkshire dialect, perhaps a London dialect. These things are all part of the richness of the language, and people should not be looked down upon from a prescriptive attitude if they use them. So Milroy there really attacking the complainers and saying, look, don't complain, let us use our language. Last person, and you will be familiar with this lady from your studies in child language acquisition, Jean Aitchison. Some years ago she was delivering the Reith lectures for the BBC, and she criticised what she called worriers, people that worry about the language. They're kind of complainers and sticklers as well. She says, above all, and this is a direct quote, above all, three overlapping accusations occur, and she is accusing people of these things. She talks about damp spoon syndrome, the crumbling castle viewpoint, and the infectious disease assumption. And she says these three things are her metaphors for describing people that criticise the way modern language is used. So first of all, the damp spoon syndrome. A bit like putting the damp spoon back in the sugar bowl where it gets all sticky with sugar. People criticise people for being lazy, for not cleaning the spoon or not getting a new spoon. So they criticise people for lazy use of language, for not pronouncing things properly, for not knowing how to use the apostrophe. The next way that she categorises these criticisers and worriers is the crumbling castle view. She said they have an idealistic view of the past, where the English language is a giant stronghold, a gleaming castle at the top of the hill in the sunlight, and that it should be worshipped and maintained, and its battlements should stay alert to attacks. These people conform to the crumbling castle view, and they say that actually English is crumbling. The castle is crumbling into the sea, and we need to build it up again. So they bring out the rule books to try and build it up. Lastly, Aitchison talks about a group of people that subscribe to the infectious disease assumption. They think that new language is a bit like a disease, a virus. Certainly we all have plenty of experience of that recently. But that it spreads, it gets hold, and you can't protect yourself from it. And if you are with a certain group of people, you speak in that way. I'm sure some of you remember your parents saying, "Don't speak like that. Speak correctly, please." There's a kind of idea about politeness in language, and that you must use the correct forms, and that if you associate people who don't, you will somehow contract this disease of speaking poorly. So there we have Aitchison, Milroy and Green, three very famous linguists, famous commentators on language, who have their own ways of describing prescriptivists who criticise modern developments in language. So I hope today you found out a little bit more about different attitudes to language, and that you can remember Aitchison's three metaphors. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.